From the center of the universe and the home of your Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. We've got a huge show for you today. News and notes, all sorts of things to cover, from Adriano Belli trying to set a world record to the Dontrelle Inman retirement, which came out of nowhere, the Theren Churchill trade, which also kind of came out of nowhere, Shane Ray signs in Buffalo, plus we've got some camp observations, some positional battles to highlight. I want to talk briefly about helmet decals, and we've got our world famous schedule and predictions. JB, you and I nailed the regular season 2 years ago, like absolutely nailed the regular season 2 years ago, blew it in the playoffs. Last year, we kind of bungled the regular season, but we knocked it out of the park, both with preseason predictions of Toronto Grey Cup. But I think I had Winnipeg, Toronto. I believe you had Saskatchewan, Toronto, but both with a Toronto win. So this is sure to be epic once again this year when we get to our final segment. So before we get into the heart of our podcast, I just want to have a quick word about our title sponsor, Something in the Water Brewing. Now, obviously, we're getting closer to the CFL season, but maybe more importantly, JB, we're getting closer to the re-release of Something in the Water's Longboat Pale Ale, which is a beer made essentially for Argos fans. And it's a beer that was made from a chance meeting with Darius Bladek. Again, we'll tell you this full story, and it's an amazing story. And there's so many entertaining elements to it that include Philip Blake and Muskoka chairs and all sorts of other good stuff, Lamport Stadium. So we'll give you all of that story in the weeks to come when Longboat Pale Ale is released. And tonight, what I've got on the go is a breakfast stout. This is the Pancake Bay Sweet Brunch Stout, which is another fantastic selection. I teased this one last week. Second in the world at a stout competition in London, which is pretty fantastic. And just sampling it here, I can absolutely see why. So make sure you check out Something in the Water. Check out their website. Visit them in Liberty Village because, they brew great beer. They absolutely know what they're doing. News and notes. JB, let's start off with Adriano Belli. Does it surprise you at all that Belli is trying to break the world record for the longest naturally smoked sausage?
No. I mean, if you were to guess a former Argo who would be hosting that contest, it would probably not take you long to get the Belli's name. I'm surprised they're bringing the Grey Cup anywhere near him. I would assume there'll probably be security surrounding it based on him purposely breaking it the last time he was near it. But it is a kind of absurd fundraising idea, and that seems to connect to Belli.
Yeah, it's perfect. And raising money for Sick Kids Hospital, like he's always been amazing with charities. That's always been the number one thing for him. And as much as we know what he was like on the field, and yes, he was not fun to play against on the field. There's no question about that. Belli is one of the nicest guys in the world off the field and will do everything he can to raise money for his charities. And this is just another example of that. And so the 17-foot naturally smoked sausage, which I gather is supposed to be he says it's going to be the diameter of a basketball. So this is a pretty substantial sausage, which it would have to be, I guess, to set a world record. They're holding the event this Thursday, May 18th, in the parking lot of Fresh House Foods, which is 71 Todd Road in Georgetown. And there's going to be Argos past and present, some of the 2012 Grey Cup teams, some of last year's Grey Cup winning team. The Grey Cup will be there as well. There's going to be a sausage eating contest, I hear, which I think will also be spectacular too. So I'm interested to see how this event goes down, because it's going to be very Belli. Everything about it will be very Belli. But I think most importantly, they're going to raise a lot of money for the kids, and so you can't get better than that. That's a great story, and we haven't heard much out of Belli in a while. So love hearing that. The Dontrelle Inman retirement, how surprised were you? Because I don't think, my guess is not very when you heard that Dontrelle Inman was retiring.
No, I was I was more surprised that he signed. That this is the time of year where veterans just decide that no, I don't want to put myself through this, and very quickly pull the chute on camp. But you'll see it in the NFL too, and I'm sure over the next week we're going to see a lot of one and done retirements, guys, or a couple days in just bail on camp because it's just too big an ask, physically, mentally. It can be, it really demands so much of you that guys know they're not ready to commit that. So I was not surprised. I certainly didn't have him on the roster.
Yeah, I'm the same. I didn't quite know what to do with him. I really wondered, like you, but for me, it was more about, it wasn't so much the grind, although that's obviously a part of it. And like you say, we've seen this before. For me, it was more the grind, and the change in pay is so significant. So imagine yourself, just the way that the average person can relate to this, because it's hard to relate to professional athletes, but imagine whatever it is you do for a living. You're an accountant, you're a lawyer, you're a mailman, whatever it is you do, whatever your job is. Imagine deciding to do that job again, but for about 10% of the salary. And now imagine that job is so physically demanding that every week it's the equivalent of getting into a car crash. And think about how excited you'd be to participate in something like that. And I think that's the reality. Guys that have spent years in the NFL, the CFL as a job is not easier. In fact, I would say it's actually the other way around. I think it is a harder job to be a pro athlete in the CFL. I'm not saying the level is harder, but the work you put in, I think, is more. The punishment that you endure, I believe, is more. And so to go and do that and get paid really a fraction of what you were making before, it's just really hard to justify. And sometimes that first day of camp, as good as he looked, and that's the thing, like everyone agrees, like he looked great on Sunday. He was ready to go. But I think just getting out there one more time, you look at the schedule ahead, and you're like, you know what? I think I'm good. But to be able to call it a day in the double blue, I think is a neat way to go. So this is almost like a one-day signing retirement sort of thing, except he actually got to get it out on the field one more time in Argos double blue. So I'm choosing to look at this as a positive end to Dontrelle Inman's career. I think it's a neat thing that he got to retire as a Toronto Argonaut. The Theren Churchill trade, which broke, I think caught a lot of people off guard. It caught me off guard. There was a negative reaction to it initially. And JB, I think we can explain why the Argos made this deal and why it was what it was. Because on the surface, there's no question, it doesn't look like very good value for Toronto. So here are the details of the trade. Theren Churchill, offensive lineman for the Toronto Argonauts, who's been playing mostly at guard as a backup, as a little bit of tackle, but hasn't really got out there and got on the field too much as a tackle. So a backup guard. But he was a first-round selection in the 2020 draft. The Argos had 2 first-round picks that year. They took Dejan Brissett with their first pick, which was second overall, and a few picks later took Theren Churchill, who was playing right tackle at the time, coming out of U Sports. And the plan was for him to be a tackle, but he never quite worked out that way for him. And he ends up getting traded for a 6th-round pick and traded to the Edmonton Elks. And so you're trading a former first-round pick for a 6th-round pick that can become a 5th. It's a conditional pick. It can become a 5th-round pick. But you compare that to something like the Jordan Williams trade. Jordan Williams, the first overall pick, still a round 1 pick from that same draft, and he's traded for a first-rounder. So obviously there's a mile of difference in the trade, but it's because there's a mile of difference in value, right?
Yeah, I think there's no comparison. I think Churchill was, was not who they had hoped he'd be with a first round pick. He's a serviceable depth guy, but probably 8 or 9 on a depth chart in the offensive room. So it doesn't surprise me that there wasn't much to get back. Even if he does, improve or become better with a different coach, that's not what his value was in terms of his time with the Argonauts. He's not a starting offensive lineman. So I think people, regardless of his pedigree, you're not going to get a lot of return for somebody who is not a starter.
And I really think he may have been in a position this year where the Argos might not have kept him. Like the alternative may have been eventually he gets released at the end of camp. I know certainly he wanted to be back in Edmonton. He's got a young family back in Edmonton. That's his home, or near there rather. And so really Edmonton was the only place you could trade him to. And so you're not going to get great compensation back. But I do think the alternative may have been releasing him. They've got such a strong offensive line group, and getting to see some of these younger guys competing in camp, you see right away like why this is okay for the Argonauts. And they get to do a nice thing too. They get to send a player back home. They get a pick out of it. They don't get nothing out of it. But I think anyone that's upset about this and like, oh, it's a terrible trade, the Argos got ripped off, that didn't happen. It's not a great trade for value, but there wasn't going to be anything better. There was no version of the story that ended with the Argos getting more than a 5th or 6th round pick from the Edmonton Elks. So if you look at it that way, I think, was it a good trade? No. Was it a bad trade? Really? No, it's not. If there's a mistake in here and if there's any flaw in here, it was that maybe he wasn't a first round draft pick in 2020. Maybe that's what you can criticize, but I don't think you can criticize the trade at this point. Shane Ray, your guy, JB, signs with your team, the Buffalo Bills. How's that make you feel?
Well, they're certainly not my team, but great for Shane Ray. Anytime you have players who come to the CFL and grind and put together good film and then get shots at camp, I think that's good for the league. It's good for guys who are considering whether to come up and play a couple of years, and sometimes they come up and just stay up. So I think in terms of attracting players to the league, that's a nice little bit of business just to get the camp invite to see. He clearly has an NFL first step. So I can see why he's getting a look. And, his buddy Von Miller probably had a word with the Bills as well. If he can stay healthy, I don't see any reason he could not be like a pass rush specialist. He definitely was an elite player when healthy for the Argos, but that's a big if, and that's why he just has a camp invite and not a lot of money. But I like it for the league, the same way the XFL trumpeted all their guys getting camp invites. I like it for the guys in the league, and we'll see if maybe a few more guys can get a look without having to have a former teammate whispering in the coach's ears.
This is a little bit off topic because I do want to come back to Ray just for a second. But on that note, because you mentioned the XFL really making a big deal out of, hey, this XFL player is now going off to an NFL camp. The CFL doesn't really do that oftentimes. Like the league itself, you see that stuff, like 3 Down Nation will talk about it. And you'll see other articles about that sort of thing. But you don't typically get the CFL boasting and saying, look at all these guys we're sending to the NFL. And I'm not sure the CFL's wrong in that, because I do think I think the XFL in doing that is really acknowledging that they are a stepping stone. And not that the CFL isn't for a lot of these players, but the CFL has real legitimacy too. This is a league that's been around for a long time. This is not just a new league that started this year. And I don't think the CFL actually needs to say, look, we're sending these guys off to the NFL. They're the CFL. Everyone knows who they are. They've been around forever. So I'm a little bit torn on it, but I think ultimately I feel like I don't want to see the CFL trumpeting, as you say, these NFL signings the way that the XFL does. Am I wrong on that?
No, I see your argument. I don't see. I see the argument, and I can see the discussion. I don't see it as pretending that or acknowledging that the CFL is an inferior league. I see it more as a way of talking about this. I think the more players in America see the CFL as a potential scouting zone, the higher quality of player is going to be attracted. And yes, maybe they only stay a year or two, but some will stay more. But I think it will increase engagement, which is important, especially with all USFL and the XFL. A couple more leagues kind of fighting for players. I don't mind it. I don't see it as kind of downplaying the CFL, but I get the argument. I can see why not to.
The last thing I want to say on Shane Ray is that I wish so much that everybody could have seen Shane Ray in training camp both seasons, because that was where he was at his best. And unfortunately, like we've talked about many times with Shane Ray, it's the staying healthy thing. If he can stay healthy, he's a fantastic athlete. He's a really talented football player. And if he could stay 100% healthy, I wouldn't doubt him earning a roster spot or a practice roster spot or something like that with the Buffalo Bills. But he has had absolutely no luck at all and no ability to stay healthy after these amazing training camps like that. The 2021 training camp where he first came on the scene and people just couldn't touch him in those first few days. But then the wear and tear started almost immediately. And by the time the season came around, he wasn't really in that same sort of peak condition. And then we saw it again last year where, again, in camp, he looked great. He was used very sparingly because, again, the coaching staff must be very aware of this. And we get to that first game, the first game of the season against Montreal, and he looks lights out. He has a sack, a ton of pressures. He's all over the place. And then near the end of the game, I think it was on a goal line stand. I believe it was a QB sneak touchdown, first and goal from the 1, and Ray got dinged up in a pile. And I remember seeing him running to the sideline. I don't remember if he was holding his elbow or shoulder, something like that. And from that moment on, he just wasn't the same. And he obviously didn't make it to the end of the season there. But we've seen such brief moments, and so has the NFL. That's what happened to him in the NFL too, with all the wrist injuries that he had. If he can, I hope so much that he can stay healthy for an entire year and show everybody what we got to see at camp. I think that would be a really nice way for Shane Ray to wrap things up. Let's talk about some camp observations. Before we get into specific things, JB, I'd love your perspective on what it's like having so many guys come back, because I look at this Argos team at camp. You've got an entire coaching staff back, which is really rare. That just doesn't happen after winning a championship. You don't ever get to bring everybody back. And here they are with everybody back. You've got most of the players back. There's very few, I shouldn't say there's very few new faces. There are hundreds of new faces, but most of those faces really, truthfully, aren't going to be there come the regular season. The core of this team is pretty much all the same guys. You look at the starters, the projected starters, probably 19 of the 24 were guys that were here last year. So you're not talking about introducing a brand new offense, a brand new defense, or a brand new regiment. They've all stayed in these dorm rooms at the University of Guelph. They've played on this field. They've gone through this. And so it should be no surprise that it's gone so smoothly to this point, right?
No, the advantage of having the majority of your team back, same coaches, same shorthand, guys know system. You're already probably installing a few more exotic things because you already have base down. It's like getting an extra month of training camp. So it's huge to be able to just jump to the middle of the book. and work on that. There are new players, new defensive backs, and new quarterback, so it isn't completely a return, but to have that many players back and that many coaches back is, I think, a really big advantage for the team to be able to have a smooth camp and to be able to install things faster than maybe they would, where you might not be able to install them till game 3 or something. You'll be able to get that stuff in right away.
And we've been able to see the three different years couldn't be more different. That 2020 season where everybody was new. There were like 2 guys that were on the Argos the previous year, 1 coach, everyone else was new. And so, of course, it took a little bit of adjustment. Everything was brand new. Second year, last year, they had a new defensive coordinator. There's a bunch of new guys on the coaching staff. A pretty good percentage of the team was new as well. And then you've got this year where barely anybody's new. So it's kind of interesting just to watch it from that point. But yeah, this is a team that looks like they're at the end of training camp instead of at the beginning of training camp. And that's got to be a huge advantage going into a season where you can get to week 5 stuff in ready for week 1, or in the Argos case, week 2, right?
I think that's your biggest advantage, is the sophistication of your install.
And on that note, we'll maybe transition into, well, I guess this is still camp observations here, so we're not really transitioning into positional battles. But I think on that note, on Sunday, the first day of training camp, the offense was ahead of the defense. They were giving it to the defense. It wasn't the same story on Monday. The defense was definitely the dominant force on that day. But for day 1, for the offense to be ahead of the defense is unheard of in training camp. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in the regular season, the first few weeks. It is so much harder to get up to speed on offense. But the reason why is all those guys that were out there, every single guy that they had as sort of like their group 1 was a returning guy. The newest guy is basically Chad Kelly, who spent an entire season with this system and this offense last year. Everyone else was just kind of falling into place. So of course they were ahead of the defense. Those guys all know what they were doing. The defense had a couple new faces. So that didn't surprise me, but it's really weird to see. You never ever see the offense ahead of the defense on day 1 of training camp. Couple other camp observations. There's a funny story I got to tell. I just thought this was the most amusing thing. One-on-ones, you got Curly Gittens Jr. being covered by Deshaun Amos. Gittens Jr. runs a corner route, catches the ball. It's pretty tight coverage from Amos, and they sort of acknowledge, Gittens Jr. catches the ball. Amos lets him know he's right there. And then suddenly Gittens decides to turn it on, and he turns on the jets and he starts taking it to the end zone, which wasn't what people were doing in that drill. And Amos decides he's after him. And so he turns on the jets too. And as they ran by me, they were both giggling audibly at the fact that they're trying to outrun each other to the end zone. And Gittens just made it there and said something along the lines of, I've got speed. And what I love about that is that's how football is supposed to be. That's how football is when you're a kid, you're playing around, you're laughing, you're having fun with your buddies. And a lot of it looked like that. And we saw that last year in practice too, where guys are just having a good time. Guys enjoy being around each other. There's so many of these guys that know each other well, that get along well. And I loved seeing that, just to hear them both laughing as they're running full speed after each other down the field. I thought was a really positive sign for the vibe that I'm getting from camp early on. The last camp observation, I'm going to give you a couple players that I thought really stood out. So one that I was kind of expecting, and these are both offensive linemen. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And it speaks to, again, the strength of this positional group. You know who's a really good football player? Darius Sirocco. So Darius Sirocco picked up in the offseason, coming from Ottawa last year. Sirocco looks really good. And they're going to have some problems when they start having to try and figure out where to put all these pieces. So they had Bladek resting a little bit. He wasn't going full. It allowed them to kind of play around with the line a little bit. And as I'm watching this, the Argos have a great camp strategy. They did this last year. They did this the year before. They just mix guys up in positional groups. So they'll send out a group where suddenly they've got McKellar playing right guard, left guard. He's over at tackle now. They want guys getting reps in different spots because who knows what it's going to be like when you get into the season. And once you're practicing in the regular season, you can't really afford the time to do that. So they're moving guys all over the place. And that just got my brain churning and thinking about the possibilities of, what if Soraka was playing center? What if Nicastro plays guard? What would that free up? Could you then have Hunter at tackle? Could you make an offensive line with 4 or 5 Canadians? These are just the thoughts that are going through my head. I think they've got a really nice problem. And JB, I'm going to add to that too by talking about one of Toronto's draft picks this year, Edouard Paradis from Houston Baptist. That guy's for real as well. Just watching them going through one-on-ones, going through drills, going through just even watching his technique, which you expect to be so raw typically coming out of college. First round draft picks, second round draft picks, and that's not even who we're talking about here. Guys later on in the draft, you don't see typically looking that polished. Love what I saw out of Paradis. And so I'm not saying that he's ready to be a starter or anything yet, but I could absolutely see him winning a job as a backup right away. And so they're in a great position, but an uncomfortable one. You remember what it was like at the end of last season, JB. We're watching all those 11 healthy offensive linemen, all capable of getting starting reps. I don't know what they do at that position, but I guess it's a positive, and that's the only way you can look at it at this point, right?
Yeah, it's a position that has lots of injury turnover. You could potentially maybe package somebody if somebody pops in a preseason game. Maybe you can put together a package for a trade. But I'm sure that they enjoyed having, 10, 12 offensive linemen in their room. So if you can afford it, that's fantastic.
Let's get into some positional battles. And really, we're talking about 3 spots because I think we don't know exactly how the O-line is going to line up. We have a pretty good idea. And most positional groups on the field, I think we feel similarly about. The receivers, we're not 100% sure. We'll talk about them in a second. The one corner, we're not sure, but we're pretty sure McFadden is going to play one corner spot. He did last year. They won a Grey Cup with McFadden in that spot. He's likely going back there. But the other corner spot, vacated by Jamal Peters with the Atlanta Falcons. We'll talk about that battle a little bit. And the suddenly free boundary halfback spot where Shaq Richardson played last year is also open. And so we talk about that a little bit too. So I think you and I are on the same page. Going back to receiver, we know that DeVaris Daniels is going to be out there starting. We don't know if he's going to end up at X or at W. We figure he's 100% going to be a starting receiver on the boundary side. There are some options to go with him. We know Eric Rogers now gone. He was not really present last year. And they really didn't have a steady guy to go to last year. And that's why Daniels played so much in the slot. There are options for them this year. I think if it were me, I probably put Markeith Ambles on the side with DeVaris Daniels. I think I like those two together. They only did it for one game last year, but I love that combo. And again, just like with the O-line, you're seeing in camp, they're moving guys all over the place, testing new combinations. But I wouldn't be surprised to see that setup on opening day. The field side gets more interesting because I had assumed all along that we would see Gittins Jr. and Cam Phillips. I'm less and less sure that we're going to see Cam Phillips in that spot. Gittins Jr. for sure, but I think the other 2 receiver spots may be up for grabs. And that's where you're looking at Dejon Brissett, who needs to perform. Former 2nd overall draft pick 2020, has to have a good season. Otherwise, I could see Toronto moving on completely. And he's looked good. He's had a really nice camp to this point. We're on day 3, but he looks good so far. But Tommy Neild also, and you forget I don't know why. It's something about Tommy Neild. He's just so big. You forget how fast he actually is. Seeing him running away from DBs always surprises me. I had to look back at his combine numbers. He's a really fast receiver. I forgot that he was running in the high 4.5s, low 4.6s. And yeah, he can get going, but he's misleading because of his size. But I think he's in the mix too. And then you've got all sorts of exciting American receivers. I don't think any of the new guys are necessarily battling it out, but seeing a more polished Jeremiah Hiddell, seeing Cam Phillips battling for it, seeing DeMonte Coxey, who looked really good, and this should have come in the last segment, JB, but another amazing story. You don't normally get a lot of country music played at Argos practice. They did drop some country beats at practice, and seeing DeMonte Coxey dancing to "Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy" was highly entertaining. He was 100% into it, as he always is with his dancing. But his football looks pretty good on the field too. So that positional battle, like, where would you go if you're looking at those guys? Like, do you try and go with another Canadian and start Brissett or Neal? Do you think you go more American there? Are you looking for just who are the best guys? Because the Canadians probably don't really matter too much. We've got enough on the team.
Yeah, I think you're just looking to go the best talent. They're not in a position. You can make the numbers work for the Canadian stuff. I would never really let that be a factor in determining who to keep. I think you keep the best players and, find a way to meet the rules. To be honest, if I'm running things, I would never cut a player who is talented because I had the ratio issue. I just find a way. There are other ways to meet that ratio.
I think on some teams there aren't. I think sometimes you actually have to. Sometimes you have to sacrifice talent to meet the ratio. I don't think that's the issue with the Argos. The Argos have talent through the roof in terms of their Canadians. That's not going to be a problem. They could easily start 9 Canadians without even flinching. But I think if what you're saying is true, and I tend to think you're right, if that's the case, then I would expect that the 5 starting receivers are going to end up being, and again, I don't know exactly where they're going to fit, but you'll see Daniels, you'll see Ambles, you'll see Gittins Jr., that'll be the lone Canadian receiver. And then you're going to see a combination of either like Phillips and Hiddell or Phillips and Coxey. I'm thinking more and more that we're going to see DeMonte Coxey out there. In his time starting last year, looked really good. Do you remember that play against Ottawa where he didn't get a touchdown for it? He got pushed out at the 1, but it was one of my favorite plays of the season. He just caught this ball, broke a tackle, stiff-armed a guy into the ground, knocked another guy on his back before finally being pushed out at the 1. He's a load. He's an incredible athlete. And he's just one of those guys that carries so much energy with him too. So that would be one of my early camp favorites to earn a starting spot by the time we get to the Argos regular season kickoff in week 2. Let's talk corner for a second. So Peters in Atlanta, as we said, opens up that other corner spot. This is an interesting one too. Is your instinct here, because they brought in a ton of new guys, if you're the Argos staff, are you thinking that the replacement was a guy that was already in the building? Are you leaning towards going with a guy that was here last year? And there we're talking about maybe that's Priester, maybe that's Robertson Daniel. I guess you could go Sutton. There's a few other directions you could go there. Or are you looking at the 500 new American corners that they brought in to compete for this job, like Parnell Motley and like Stiggers and all these other exciting American DBs that are brand new to the CFL? What's your instinct tell you?
Well, I think as a coach, you have to try as much as you can to not make decisions based on relationships. In terms of professional football, you want to evaluate everybody equally and pick the best athlete. So that's the challenge, to not go with people who know, to not mistake talent for understanding of scheme, and to be sure to identify, if you have players who can flash more, then that's what I would do. It's professional sports. I don't. If somebody's better, if somebody has more natural talent, then they'll pick up the scheme. I think the tricky part is not being blinded by scheme comfort. I
think my instinct tells me Robert Priester is going to be the guy starting in that other corner spot. But I don't think it's necessarily because he was here last year. I think he might just be the most talented guy. Like I remember when the Argos first signed him, as I always do, I look through some of their film and see, okay, what is it that the Argos are getting here? And his Wyoming film where he's playing corner is really strong. He's a highly talented corner. Now, he played a little bit all over the place. He didn't really see much time at corner at all last year. He was playing some halfback. He was playing, I think they had him at Sam for a little bit as well. And he was just sort of learning all the different spots that he could. But I think his most natural position is at corner. Like he's not a huge guy, 5'9", 180. He's not a guy I love having in the halfback or the Sam spot. I'd rather have him on the outside. But I think that really suits his skill set anyway. And so even if you take out the fact that he's ahead of everyone else in terms of scheme and system, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day, Robert Priester is the corner opposite Tavares McFadden. That said, he's going to get a really good push from Motley. He's going to get a really good push from Stiggers, who's so interesting to watch. This guy, like never having played, he's my the guy I'm most fascinated by in camp because of the fact that Quintez Stiggers has never played in any sort of college system. And I just think that's so unique. You just don't see that in professional football. And he doesn't look lost. Like he completely looks like he belongs out there. And, he's played in the fan controlled league and has some experience, obviously. But yeah, he's a highly interesting guy to watch. And I don't think he'll be a guy that's actually challenging to start week 1. But man, his learning curve is just going to absolutely have an upward trend from like today all through the end of the season. I think he's going to be a heck of a player by the time they get to season's end. He's a guy that I think probably starts in the practice roster, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the starting lineup at some point this season because he's got talent. There's so many of these talented guys. And then JB, if we can transition to halfback, I remember when I talked to the first time I ever interviewed Coach Bell, I remember him talking to me about his defensive philosophy, and what he valued the most was a triangle between his halfbacks and his sandbacker. To him, that was where you wanted to have the guys you trusted most. And his guys, Coach Bell's guys, you look back at guys with Calgary ties, guys like Shaq Richardson and Amos, and looking at that structure, that triangle, and they had Chris Edwards in that triangle the last couple seasons. I think if we're looking for a halfback, this is going to be one of his guys. This is going to be someone that was on the team. And if it's not going to be Maurice Carnell, and if Carnell's not going to be ready to go to start the season, for example, then I think it's got to be Robertson Daniel. And he got some time playing side by side with Priester on the boundary side. And Robertson Daniel is like having another coach out there. You see after reps, Robertson Daniel throws his arm over a new corner, over an experienced corner. They walk to the sideline. Daniel's been around. Like he knows this game now. He's now into his 30s, but he still looks good. And you don't need to have the same elite speed that he had back when he was 24. He doesn't have that anymore. He's not the same athlete that he was when he's 24. He's had so many injuries. He's older. It happens to all of us. But he's got it up here. He's got the knowledge, and having another coach on the field like that, I think it's going to be so tempting for Coach Bell to put Robertson Daniel in that halfback spot, because I think he gives you what the Argos lost in losing Shaq, not only in the leadership and the experience, but I think also in the little bit of fire, the spark that the team lost in losing Chris Edwards and losing Shaq. Robertson Daniel's got a little bit of that, and I'm sure we'll see that in his week 1 or week 2 face paint as he comes out of the tunnel, which he loves to put on a show. I think that's probably your starting halfback for week 2. Any thoughts on that? We good to go?
No, I have no thoughts on that.
But you like, aside from injuries, like you are a Robertson Daniel believer. It's just that he hasn't really had a chance to show as much.
I don't know if I would go so far as believer. I'd have to see more.
I get that. It's been he's been hurt in like week one since becoming an Argo. It's just been.
I mean, I like the idea of him.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was, he's a good player in Calgary. And again, he's got that, like, he's got everything that Coach Bell values. And I think it's so important when you're playing in the inside like that. So I expect to see him there. All right. I got to briefly address helmet decals. People are very upset about the placement of helmet decals on the new Argos helmet. And I'm going to quickly address that. I promise I won't take 20 minutes on this. Like I kind of want to because I love talking about helmets. Some people have noticed that on some of the new Argos helmets, the decal is very far back. It's true. It is on some, not on all. The way that these decals work, they're put on by hand. They're not like a normal sticker. They're like, it's a really thick, heavy plastic sticker that has a lot of flexibility, malleability, is that a word, to it? And it allows you to kind of like squeeze out the air bubbles as you're applying them. But these are put on by hand. They're not put on by machine. And so you've got, in this case, like the equipment manager putting on these decals. You get them into roughly the right place, and then you start smoothing them out from the center, and then the actual sticker sort of comes together, stretches apart to get rid of those air bubbles, and you've got a nice looking sticker at the end. The problem is not all helmets are designed the same, and on some of these helmets, it's really difficult to find a spot for them. On some of those new Speed Flexes, for example, you've got parts of the chin strap that are actually covering the decal. You've got holes in the helmet with those Speed Flexes, and some of the other that I don't even know which helmet that is, that sort of oblong looking helmet. It's got some really odd placement of holes and ventilation and other things. And you don't really want to have the logo over that. So it means you have to sometimes put them at slightly different angles. You got to put them a little more forward, a little more back. And on some of these helmets, you just have to put them a little further back. And I think, unfortunately, on some of the helmets that have been, some of the snapshots that have been taken and spread through Twitter, they happen to be a few of the helmets where the logo is just a little further back. And yes, it looks a little weird. Most of the helmets are not like that. Most of them are up in the proper place. It's only guys that are wearing that one certain helmet where they are further back. And yeah, it looks weird, but they don't all look like that. Trust me, seeing them on the practice field, they look fantastic. This is a gorgeous looking helmet. Like I've said from day one, the logo is not too far back in most of them. All right, JB, it is time for our world famous schedule and predictions. This is basically it. We are setting what is going to happen. No need to tune in until next season after we're done with this. So, JB, let's go week by week through this. Let's see if we can nail this like we did 2 weeks ago after being a little bit off last year in the regular season. So, it's a bye week one. You and I have already been very vocal about how much we hate that. It worked out okay for the Argos last year, but only just barely. They really shouldn't have won that opener against Montreal if it weren't for that missed 23-yard field goal at the end. But a week two open at home against Hamilton. This is the banner unfurling. This is going to be celebrations. How do you see this game going to open the season?
Yeah, I think they win that game. They have the bye. Hamilton has to play the week before against Winnipeg. If they don't win this game, I think they're in tons of trouble. Home opener, you have an extra week to practice. This has to be a win.
I'm going to go the other way on this. I think this is a loss.
God. If they don't win this game, close the barn.
I don't think that's the case. I don't think this is a panic. I don't think they win the game. Here's why. Do you remember a couple of years ago when the Jays assembled that, like, what was supposed to be the super team, and everyone was talking about how good they were going to be? And on opening day, they had all this celebration, and they were on the Jumbotron about all these different media outlets predicting them to get to the World Series. And then they went out and lost 74-0. It's going to be really hard to avoid that. Not only are we talking about Grey Cup hangover, which Coach Dinwiddie has been really pushing the guys at camp, reminding them that this is a new season. Last year's done. Move on. It's easier said than done. This is a team that just won the Grey Cup. They're going to be celebrating it that night in front of Hamilton, who has been there and lost it again and again and again. And the Tiger Cats are going to be standing on that sideline with steam coming out of their ears as that banner comes down. And they're going to get let out of their cage and be like an absolute wildfire. And I think I think you will get the best Hamilton Tiger Cats game of the entire year.
No, I
in
don't.
that game.
I just couldn't disagree more. Not coming off playing Winnipeg. It's not two teams opening the season. It's one team that has to play the number one team in the league, and one team that gets to not do anything but practice. I just think that tips the balance.
I just don't see it that way, because Hamilton's going to lose against Winnipeg in that opener.
Yeah, but that's going to be a tough game. That is not going to be like that's going to be a physically draining game. I just think that toll, even though it's early, is a lot.
I feel pretty strongly about this one. I think we're gonna have to make a side wager. We're gonna have to bring one of our old sub bets
we'll see
back.
Like how it looks. For me, the Argos have to dominate the first half of the schedule, because the second half is really uphill.
And I think they do, but I think that begins in week 3. So let's move to week 3. So at Edmonton, I've got this down as a win simply because I just don't think Edmonton's very good. The Argos played terribly in their game against Edmonton last year and still won. And they had probably their worst game of the year against Edmonton last year. This is a win, I'm assuming, for you?
It is. It does feel like it's an optimistic win, because it does feel like a trap game, especially if they beat Hamilton in a really kind of juice-filled opener, and then you go to Edmonton and nobody cares and it's barely televised, and you could see how easily it would be to not bring the heat there. But I'm really hoping that they realize how much they have to make hay in the first 8 games.
And the very next week, we're now in week 4, game 3. They host the BC Lions. I think this is a win too. I think it's really tough for BC. I think it's tough for any team to travel across the country. We see it going the other way. Have we ever seen it going the other way? And I think it's tough for BC too. They have struggled coming to Toronto the last couple of years. And I think this is going to be another Argos win. It'll be a tight game, but I think the Argos are 2-1 at this point, having dropped their opener, and they string together back-to-back wins against Edmonton and BC. How do you see that week 4 game?
Yeah, I see them going at 3-0.
Okay, that's a nice start.
BC comes to Toronto. It's hard to travel across the country. I think the Argos feel it. They've shown to be a very good home team. 2 of the first 3 are at home. I'm counting on them to win that game.
Yeah, I think they do put up a lot of home wins this season. It'll be a little bit like 2 years ago, where they just couldn't lose at home. And then they've got another bye, their second bye. Oh man, I hate their bye schedule again. And then we go into the week 6 game. This is at Montreal. I don't think Montreal is a very good team. I've got this down as a win, and now I've got a 3-game win streak going here. Is this a win for you coming off the bye?
Yeah. Again, Montreal is has a game the week before, and I think that having to play that game where Toronto's coming off a bye, I just think that's such a huge advantage. And Montreal is a team that probably is going to take half the season to kind of get better. So I think early, this is a win. Even in Montreal, a place where the Argos almost never win, I do have it as a win.
And the very next week is, for one of us, a revenge game as the Argonauts travel to Hamilton for week 7. And this is where I think they get revenge on what I had as an opening season loss. I think they win in Hamilton. I think they actually pummel the Tiger Cats in Hamilton in this game.
Yeah, I have that as a loss.
Yeah, and so we've evened it out. But I think one of those two things happen. I think whatever happens in that opening week, if you're right and the Argos win that opener, I do think they lose in Hamilton in week 7. But I just think it's going to go the other way around. But here we are with them at the same record, where through week 7, we have them at 4-1, just different ways to get there. And then things start to get, it's really week 8 where it does start to get a little tougher, because week 8, everybody but me is heading out to Halifax. I'll be on the other side of the country. I'm in Victoria for that game. But JB, you'll be in Halifax watching the Argos do what against the Rough Riders?
I do have them winning. I think that
Even against your number 3 ranked Rough Riders?
I know the Rough Riders will be looking for revenge, but I have to feel that Toronto has a good feel for how they want to run the week, the rhythm of the week, where they're going to eat meals, where they're going to travel, where they're going to practice. They have a good template. It worked last year. Just follow that template again. The Halifax crowd will be a little different than the Acadia crowd. I think there's a chance that there's more Toronto fans in Halifax than there were in Acadia. So I like Toronto to pull that out, actually.
I think it's going to be mostly green. I think that's going to be a Saskatchewan win. Like, it was pretty close to being a Saskatchewan win last year. It was only the heroics of Winton McManus in just on a ball that Cody Fajardo should not have thrown. McManus made a great play for the pick 6. Without that, if Saskatchewan gets another first down, that game's over.
Well, Saskatchewan has to fly to BC and then fly to Halifax.
I know, I saw their path. Actually, their whole travel schedule is a mess. Just look at their schedule.
That's not great. So I do factor that in a little.
It's true. I get that. I have that one down as a loss. You got it as a win. Let's move to week 9. This is at Calgary. I've seen this movie. This is a loss, especially if I am there.
I don't even think I'm going to watch that game. So disgusting. Yeah, I have it as a loss too. No, thank you.
I can't describe. What was the score in the one that I was at last year in Calgary? Was
17-14 or some nonsense?
No, I think the Argos had like 1. It felt like that anyway. Oh, it was rough.
No, the defense runs their routes for them. It's embarrassing.
Week 10, they're back home for 2 straight. They've got Ottawa and then Calgary again. How do you have them doing against the Red Blacks in week 10?
Yeah, I have them at home winning against the Red Blacks. I think that, the Red Blacks may be improved, but not so much that they're going to beat Toronto in Toronto. I like Toronto to take care of business there.
I agree. And I think these will be, I think every Ottawa game is going to be good. They play 3 times this year. I think they're all going to be tight. As spoiler alert here, but I do think Toronto wins all 3 of these games against Ottawa.
Little unevenness there too. Ottawa plays Saskatchewan on the Sunday before the game.
Right.
And Toronto plays on the Friday. So a couple extra days.
Yeah, that actually, as much as I hate the bye schedule, a lot of these things did work out well for Toronto when you look at that. Yeah, and it goes, I know.
Right. For me, first 8-10 games, you really want to do well, because in almost every week, the bye schedule or where teams play works out for Toronto. And then, as you would expect, the shoe drops and the second half of the season is a little more uphill.
And then there's their last bye of the year in week 11. And then, I know.
So early.
I know it is. And then week 12, they host Calgary. This is going to be a win. They are going to beat the Stampeders for the first time since the 2021 opener at McMahon. The reason why, they're coming off a bye for one. And I don't think Calgary is what they were before. I think this is a win. And you know how much all the former Calgary guys in Toronto, like they don't want to put up another goose egg. They're going to win this game.
No, I agree. And once, I think again, it is playing a team who played the week before and you're coming off a bye. That should be a win for you. Unless you're not a very good team, that's a real competitive advantage. So I feel like those games, as a coaching staff, you should consider those must wins.
The following week, Labor Day at Hamilton. Last year worked out very well for the Argos. I think we're back to the old format. I think Hamilton wins this one in Labor Day.
I went back and forth on this one. Because I had them losing the last. I have it more like back and forth, win-loss. I have them winning Labor Day because I have Hamilton coming home from BC.
Yeah,
and that's a bit of a trip.
I could see that happening. I have trouble seeing Hamilton losing back-to-back Labor Days. I think I'm just shell-shocked after so many just Labor Day, not even just Labor Day losses, Labor Day blowouts, painful Labor Day experiences. And last year wasn't enough.
Well, I feel like the magic is broken. I feel like the Argos for a long time kind of psyched themselves out, and now it's not that big a deal to go in there and take that win. I think they're ready to go take it again.
Maybe. Week 14, they're hosting Les Alouettes. And again, I just don't think Montreal's good. I think this is a pretty easy win. And for me, I have them coming off a loss against Hamilton. So that even more to me is going to get you pretty focused for the Alouettes. So I think that's a Week 14 win.
And I have the reverse. I have that as kind of a down game after the Labor Day rush. So I have Montreal, kind of rounding into shape as they get a little later in the season. I like Montreal to win there.
And I think we're going to be opposite on this next one too. Week 15, because I have them winning in Week 14, I think they lose in Montreal. First of all, it's hard to play Montreal, as we've outlined. This is a back-to-back situation. It is so hard to win both legs of the back-to-back against a divisional opponent. I just see this as they're going to lose one of those two. And for me, they're going to lose in Montreal. They win the week before.
Yeah, I mean, that's logical. I have it the other way around. I have them, coming down from the Hamilton Labor Day win and then getting their act back together in Montreal.
And down into the final stretch, they're hosting Hamilton for the 17th time. This is the last meeting until probably the Eastern final. And Hamilton, I just don't think is as good a team as Toronto. Toronto responds at home and wins that game. Is this a win for you as well?
No, I have them going back and forth, win-loss,
right, because you have the Labor Day loss, right?
Okay. So I have that as a loss.
And then the toughest game of the whole year. They are end of September. They travel to Winnipeg for a Friday night game. And I don't see this. This is tough. Winnipeg's the best team in the league on paper, and they've shown it on the field in almost every game but the Grey Cup last year. I think Winnipeg wins this one. Yeah.
And Winnipeg coming off a bye, like Winnipeg doesn't play the week before. They're going to want to beat Toronto. I have that an L in ink.
Yeah, I feel pretty similarly. The following week, they're hosting the Elks. I think the Elks are done at this point. They, I believe, would have 3 games remaining at that point. I think they're probably mathematically done, and just not a great team still. They'll be better. They're going to have some real games. They're going to upset some people this year. They're going to get a win at home at some point. Actually, a few, but they're not going to win on this night at BMO. That's a win for the Argos.
I have it as a win. I think it'll be tough because, Edmonton, the second half of the season, the Argos play a number of games against teams that had the bye the week before. Edmonton has the bye the week before. This is the kind of game that could kind of make their season because they're not going to the playoffs. Coach will really want it, Coach Jones. I have it as a win, but I circle that game as dangerous because the last 5 games I think are really tough for the Argos. I think I think you could easily see them losing 3 or 4 of the last 5 games. So I am a little concerned.
Week 19, they host the Red Blacks. I have that as a win, but that's one that I circled because I think the Red Blacks are fighting for a playoff spot. And I don't think you have them in the mix probably at that point, but I think they will be. And I think they're going to be really giving it everything they got. I still have it as an Argos win, but I have that circled as a dangerous game.
I have it as a win as well. I will not give Otto respect until they tear it from my cold dead hands.
Week 20, they're at Saskatchewan. This is tough. They won there last year, but that was not a normal team. Saskatchewan, half the team had COVID. They were in so much trouble. They were starting their 4th string quarterback in that game, and Toronto barely pulled that one out. It took a 70-yard touchdown from Curly Gittens Jr., a late touchdown from Cam Phillips to pull that one out. And that was Jake Dolagala quarterbacking for Saskatchewan. And so it's just so tough to play there. The Argos have not, the last few years, traveled west very well. So I think that's a loss in week 20.
Yeah, same.
Week 21 wraps up with a game in the nation's capital. I have them winning that final game of the season against the Red Blacks. And I think you probably have them dropping this game, not needing it, right?
I do. I have them dropping it, not needing it.
Yeah, because the way I'm sort of adding this up, that would end up with I think we're both at 11-7 at this point. And that sounds just about right. That's what their record was last year. And I think this is a very similar team to what they were last year. So 11-7. This wins the East in my books. Does this win your East?
Yeah, I believe much like last year. I believe like, you know, the way they went through it last year was perfect. You get into a big lead in the first half of the season. You kind of hang on till the end and end up, you know, taking it by a game because the other teams took a little longer to get going. I see something similar this year, the way the schedule plays out. I think I can't imagine 11 wins does not win the East. I know you love Hamilton more than me. I don't see their plan B if the quarterback is not washed. You know, if Levi doesn't have it anymore, you know, I don't see them putting up 12 or 13 wins. But yeah, this 11 wins, I feel pretty confident on it. I feel pretty confident that they get to 11, but they really need to go like 6-2 to start the season. And if they're less than that, I think 11 becomes a much harder goal because they will start playing teams coming off buys instead of the reverse. The matchups aren't great. You know, those last 7 games, I hope they do not need to go into those last 7 games coming away 5-2 or something. I think that's going to be really tough.
Let's do our quick playoff run. And why don't I give you my playoff run and then you give me your sort of playoff run. We'll just sort of go through Toronto's stuff and then also pick a Grey Cup winner. So my playoff run ends badly, and I apologize, Toronto Argonauts fans. I have a bad feeling about this, and I don't really have a lot to justify it with other than just knowing the Grey Cup's in Hamilton this year. The idea of coming off a Grey Cup win last year, I think it's going to be really tough to get back there again. And I have them winning the East, but I have them losing at BMO in the East final to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And that's going to be a really tough one for Argos fans. However, what will make that slightly more palatable is that I think it's going to be a Winnipeg Hamilton Grey Cup. And I think the Blue Bombers are going to win it once again in Hamilton, and it is absolutely going to crush that city. And if there's any positive takeaway for Argos fans from watching the Argos lose in the East Final, it would be watching the Hamilton Tiger Cats lose yet another Grey Cup to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and again in the city of Hamilton. That's how my season ends. How does it end for you, JB?
That's fair. I'm gonna. I mean, having rookie or really young quarterbacks in the playoffs is generally not a recipe for success. It's not uncommon or unusual for the older quarterbacks to really, you know, step up in those playoff games. So, you know, Chad Kelly versus Bo Levi in a playoff game, I can't say that I'm pumped for that, but I'm going to give Toronto the nod at home to get into the Cup and to lose to a very, very good Winnipeg team. I know it's boring to pick Winnipeg, but I think like any team, you know, whether it's the Edmonton Oilers or the Detroit Red Wings or the New England Patriots or the San Antonio Spurs, it is an incredibly talented franchise that got better. I don't see any question marks on their roster. The roster, where even ridiculous. As much as I like Toronto, I can come up with at least 3 pretty significant questions, and I don't see any questions in Winnipeg, and they're going to be mad as heck that I'm sure they feel that they blew that Grey Cup. So Winnipeg's on a mission. I don't see anybody beating Winnipeg. I really don't.
Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.